Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. Today is a slightly shorter stream than the previous two ones. We obviously got surprise big reveals. We still have some interesting stuff today, especially when it comes to everyone who's like a die-hard Apple rumor follower. You know that some rumors are more likely to come out than others. Like exact pricing, for example, is notoriously difficult to nail down because it can be changed at the last minute. It's often decided very close to the final product launch. Final names can also be subject to change. Now, usually we have pretty good idea, especially when there's a lot of precedent. But then when you look, for example, even this year at the iPhone 16e, you'll find products that ended up having names that we didn't expect. So we get a little bit of that latter subject today. Thank you to Mark Gurman, our resident Apple tech rumor Jesus from Bloomberg, and his Power On newsletter. We'll get through that. We also have some rumors that are a little bit concerning that concern the iPhone 17. I'll go through why I don't necessarily believe those rumors fully. And I'll try to contextualize it with obviously other leaks and stuff like that we have gotten in the past. In addition, I know this is very, very, very much an Apple and similar technology focused channel. We do occasionally, though, cover some gaming related stuff and yeah, in that vein, I would like to cover the supposed cancellation of the long rumored Microsoft handheld, which is kind of supposed to be like a Series S successor. While there will still be like a dedicated gaming console that will be like a Series X successor. So it's all getting pretty shitty and pretty confusing in Xbox land. Their sales are like almost non-existent anywhere outside of North America, and even in North America that was before the price increase. So yeah, a lot still to discuss today. As always, I'm open to suggestion from you guys. Looking at the live chat, I see we already have the usual subjects: Angelica, Rosa, Riley, all joining the chat. Thank you guys so much. You can also see myself actually commenting for once in the live chat, leaving you the link for the Discord that has been actually growing a little bit. We have people posting like rumors that they would like me to react to. We have people even like adding their own time zones to, like, when I say, oh, I'm going live at about those times, and they're like, well, for me that's about that time. I'm like, great. That's what you should be doing. That helps engagement. I cannot answer everything. I cannot provide context to everything. I cannot make everything specific to you, every one of you. So the more guys and gals and non-binaries, whatever you identify as, the more people we have, the merrier, and I think the more productive. Granted, it's not a productive thing, but it's still fun, right? And the easier it is for you to know when I'm going live, what topics we are discussing, that all helps. It helps me. Hopefully it helps you as well. So without further ado, let's get into it. My last shout out for now to do the YouTube jazz: subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting. You can also become a direct supporter of this channel by becoming a YouTube member. Shout out to Angelica, Steve, and Max Maximus, our MagTech Pro Max supporters. And you can also become a supporter over on Patreon. And whenever you catch me live, just consider throwing me a small donation in the form of a super chat or super sticker. However you choose to engage with this community is very much appreciated. Directly, indirectly, just watching the videos, it all helps. Let's actually get right into it with Mark Gurman's Power On newsletter. Let's make the display a little bit less bright. Thanks to better display, like the amount of brightness that I can get out of my MacBook Pro is just absolutely insane. So I will not be ranting today about how Mark Gurman tries to be more of an analyst than he actually is, rather than the inside scoop guy. Especially on, oh my God, did I subconsciously copy like on all things Apple and consumer tech? Because that's how I like usually advertise an incoming stream, like all things Apple and tech. Jesus, did I did I subconsciously like take that in? Because it definitely wasn't on purpose. So maybe I'll have to change that up a little bit. We can read through much of it. This is actually not like a super long report. It gets long if you consider everything, but yeah, primarily the biggest reveal that he is giving us here is actually a surprising one, and something that I alluded to in the beginning of the video, which is that we might have a name for the new macOS version, right? Now, every iOS release, every macOS release, every tvOS release, they do have their own internal naming, right? What's interesting though, with macOS, Apple gives that name to the broader public, right? Catalina, Sequoia, Mavericks, Lion, Mountain Lion, right? We have so many names going back before they started naming it after places in California. Now, years and years of naming of places in California. And Craig Federighi always cracks his jokes, right? Oh, we have our crack marketing team. They like go high into their VW bus, right? So it's fun, but it's not something Apple does for every operating system. So it's always interesting to see what they call it after. Sometimes the name has deeper meaning. Very often it's based on like one feature or something like that. And very often those names never leak, right? So in fact, I would say basically always they don't leak, or basically they never leak. And this is why it's a little bit surprising that Mark Gurman is now being able, a full week. We are close to dub, but it's not quite like, that last minute weekend where we usually get like all the details from Mark Gurman, because he partners with like reviewers who got that product early on. He partners with people who like even get like early hands-on stuff and shit like that. And he partners with people who like get the marketing materials early. So right now, I don't know where he would be getting this. Maybe he actually has sources really high up at Apple, at their crack product marketing team, or it's maybe related to WWDC itself, right? It's a physical event. Apple has to create like a venue for it. So maybe at some point somebody even of the builders there got a glimpse of it or whatever, or even the people watching that keynote video, right? Now that's a very small subject, very small number of people, but who knows? So if this turns out to be correct, I would actually argue that that would be, while in the grand scheme of things, it's not an important leak or whatever, it will be one of the more interesting things to leak, because it's usually not something we get early information on. So, since 2013, Apple has named every new version of its Mac operating system after a significant place in California, Mavericks, a surfing location, then Apple honored the state's base, mountain ranges, or national parks, islands, and even a wine country. The current macOS is named after the Sequoia National Forest. The names can provide hints about how important the software updates are. In 2014, a major redesign was given the name of Yosemite, the world-famous park known for its rock formations. That was a redesign, though I would argue, like, does really the fact that, like when I look, for example, at the Yosemite redesign, right? Like, does it really like suggest that, oh, because like it's not a rocky operating system like design? So I'm a little bit confused. The 2020 software, which accompanied the shift to in-house chips, was named Big Sur, with emphasis on big. That to me is a little bit of a far. And again, this is where I do criticize Mark Gurman for his incessant need to like ascribe deeper meaning to everything. It reminds me, back in the day, I was a pretty hardcore Star Wars fan, especially leading up to like the release of The Force Awakens and Episode 8, and then by Episode 9 I fell off. And I remember the trailers being dropped, right? And people try to analyze like not every second, but like literally every shot of the freaking trailer. And I feel like Mark Gurman tries to do that, but he does it with like Apple and its entire software portfolio, right? We already have a pretty big hint at a redesign or a substantial change this year, and that is the change. Instead of going to like iOS 19, we're going to 26. With that iOS 26 change, we are also changing the number for every other major Apple operating system. That's enough. Trying to look into like Big Sur was big because it coincided with Apple M1 chips. And the big means it was big? Nah, sorry, man. That's a little bit like, but whatever. I said I'm not gonna be attacking Mark Gurman for any of his like shenanigans. We are in the week leading up to Dub. We are probably getting like two last reports from him. I would assume something maybe in the middle of the week, maybe up until Thursday, Friday, and then I would assume we get maybe something at the very end of the week on Sunday, leading up to the actual event on Monday. Now we are getting the third significant macOS redesign in the California naming era, and Apple is again looking for something special. Again, I have no idea why Lake Tahoe is more special than anything else, but okay. According to him, he is told that the company has homed in on Lake Tahoe as its next moniker, making it macOS Tahoe. Okay, so it's not macOS Lake Tahoe. That makes sense. Kind of how Sequoia was not macOS Sequoia Forest, it was macOS Sequoia. Okay, that makes sense. It's a famous resort era. I also wonder what people will like pronounce it outside of the United States. Like the OE is really not a common ending in the English language. It's a famous resort area and a vacation destination and second home site for many Apple employees. Again, there is also the argument to be made, though, that California is big, but the amount of actual notable places, the amount of places that would be known around the United States and worldwide, they're kind of running out of them. Like, not literally. I think there would be like another 5 or 6 or even 10. But at some point, the choosing of a specific place, like I have known every single name that they have used thus far. I believe outside of Big Sur, right? Because Big Sur, I believe, is an actual mountain, right? It's not the actual mountain range. Big Sur. Oh no, Big Sur is the coast shit. Okay, no. Okay, so yeah, then I still don't know what Big Sur is. Now I guess I refreshed my memory. Okay. So yeah, it will get a little bit random at some point of what they choose from California. I wouldn't be surprised if at some point they like switch up to places in the United States. That obviously opens up a lot of opportunities, right? I mean, I guess they could like, if they do it in the near future, they can try to appease conservatives a little bit with that, saying, oh, you know what, we are switching away from California to the United States, right? Because like the diehard Republicans care about such performative bullshit rather than actual change. Yeah, but not too much politics, I promise. The deep blue lake is also known to show the reflection of the sky and surrounding mountains, as contrary to other lakes, because you know, like water, like it's not always like Jesus, bro. Of course there's reflection, but like, come on. Like, it would be interesting if he said that was actually their line of thinking, right? Let's say he actually has insight into one of the marketing guys, right? That to me would be actually interesting if he said this is coming from a source familiar with the marketing material, right? That's their line of thinking. But instead he's like, oh, this lake is famous for it. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm like, they could have chosen other lakes for it and whatever, or they could have chosen I don't know what else. Like it's honestly silly to me. I have always liked that spiel that Craig does with like how the name gets revealed, but ultimately it's like a minuscule fraction of a fraction of the macOS story each year. Something that flicks at the striking visuals of the new user interface. Sure, Mark. Um, of course, he also that's basically it, right? So that's our big scoop from Mark Gurman this week that WWDC is going to feature, of course, the macOS new version. With also a rebranding across the board to 2026. Um, he's saying that there's a unification theme that basically goes across the software. We talked about, for example, how iPadOS and macOS are designed to be more aligned, right? How every operating system borrows design elements from visionOS. So whether we are talking aesthetics or features, we are talking about changes here. So Apple is pushing a more frequent software updates. That also makes sense. That actually is something that I have talked about where when we found out that it's going to be called 26, and I have said by basically priming people that this operating system will come into its prime in 26, Apple is very much giving itself leeway to like iOS 26.3.4, right? Rather than pushing everything into a dub keynote, rather than trying to meet deadlines in still like October or November of the same year, they can focus on launching a more refined software, or at least a not so buggy one, considering that redesigns usually coincide with more bugs. Right? And they can focus on structuring their marketing differently, right? If they have a lot more AI stuff to show with iOS 26.3 or 0.4, right? That gives them wiggle room to talk about AI again when they show again the iPhone 17e, for example, right? Or when they show the next iPad. So that basically prepares people for this subtle change. They have been doing this more over the last couple of years, where I would argue like the 0.4 releases, for example, have been decently big in recent memory. And then 0.5, 0.6, those are usually like more refinement, but that still leaves like two big like intermediary updates in 0.3 and 0.4 that launch in the beginning of a new year. And now 26 is basically going to explain that better. Two, the operating systems typically launch in September, meaning they're only available for a few months during their announcement year. We have also talked about how Apple has done that in the past, and this is, again, a big thank you to Mark Gurman, because this is something that I actually forgot, which is, for example, iLife 08 was actually like announced in 2007. iLife iWork 11 were actually shown and released in 2010. So Apple has a history of actually following this more car-like branding of talking about the next year. And it's, of course, also designed to be more futuristic here. It's going to be more competitive, quote unquote, with like the Galaxy S26 that's going to launch in like next January, next February. And of course, it also pulls it ahead of like Android 16, which is where we are at right now. Might we get like an Android 27 next year? Will be interesting if that's the case. Not sure if it's really necessary. I like Android really screwed up one thing, which if you have historically followed the branding of Android, then what was actually always your favorite part of Android branding? And I promise you it's not the number. It was always the sweets, right? It's Android gingerbread and ice cream sandwich and even Kit Kat, right? That's what was fun about Android naming, similar to how we talk about like the California places for macOS. And obviously they started kind of running out of sweets, so they focused more on the number. But it is like, in my opinion, a very like missed opportunity to not have switched to something else. Now maybe maybe it shouldn't be like a meat dish, right? There are a lot of vegetarians and vegans in California and among their employees, so maybe that wouldn't have been really popularly received. But there should have been some kind of replacement. When Apple ran out of big cats, they publicly addressed it. They said, look, we are running out, literally out of big cats. We have panthers, lions, mountain lions, tigers. It's time to move away. And I always felt it weird that Android didn't do something similar of like, oh, we're switching from sweets to like again, they could have done something like places where they live, like even after cities or whatever. But yeah, obviously none of that really matters. I'm just trying to give you a little bit more context. That means also, of course, the rebranding to 26 this year will be followed by 27 this year. One lingering question, this is interesting to see Mark Gurman address, is whether Apple will make a similar switch for its devices. In other words, will the iPhone 17 end up being called the iPhone 26? Well, for one, he talks that this is not likely, at least to his own understanding. For one, iPhone numbers are well known to consumers, so that's actually different from what, for example, my niece just got an iPhone 16, right? She loved the aquamarine color. Her old iPhone 12 mini had like broken glass. The battery life was terrible at this point, right? So she switched from a 5.4-inch device to a 6.1-inch, much better battery, much better connectivity, much better speakers, displays, everything, right? The only thing she's basically missing is promotion, but I like showed her like promotion or not, and she said she couldn't see the difference, or she didn't care. So she instead got the iPhone with the prettiest color ever made, in my opinion, ultramarine. I always call it aquamarine after the gem. So the other factor here is that people tend to hang on to iPhones for more than 1 year. Trying the hardware to a specific year would likely make older iPhones outdated. That, to me, is pretty pointless because it's hard to predict how people actually react. We do have names that are based on years. In fact, like Apple's most notable competitor, Samsung, does it. If anything, I think it's more likely that Apple would get rid of numbers altogether and use the year in like in brackets as like an addition, similar to how they brand like MacBook Pros, iPad Pros, right? And especially now that the iPhone switches to like an Air and Pro branding, potentially we get like an iPhone Ultra when the Fold comes out. I would argue at that point the numbers actually stop making too much sense, because at that point we would have, well, the iPhone Air is like named 17, right? But it's not really the 17th Air. And the Ultra will definitely not be like the 18th or 19th Ultra. Now, they could still do that. But at that point, I would argue that actually combining it with the model year does make more sense. Then he talks about the gaming app that we have already talked about. Let's actually look into what the main topic of his WWDC coverage is this week. And this is where I actually once again want to really disagree. It's this like complete focus on AI, which again, I don't understand why people think that Apple is doomed if they're like not an AI leader. Right? Like Apple did not make a search engine, right? And people thought, oh my God, the main way to interact with the web, how will Apple compete with that? And they ended up collecting like 30% of the revenue, of the profits that Google makes from search engine entries on iOS, right? How will Apple compete with YouTube? Well, guess what? They did not need to. They have podcasts for people who use their hardware, and they're fine, right? Like, they didn't go bankrupt because, like, a lot of people try to say because software dominates our hardware usage, that who controls software, right, they will also make you buy their own hardware, right? But don't forget, Apple still controls the software in their devices, the way it looks, the operating system, even like on the API level, how it integrates with the hardware, right? Apple is not losing out on ChatGPT or Google Gemini functionality. Both of them have recently been rolling out more and more stuff. Some of them actually first on iOS, and some of their best apps are actually on Mac, right? This was actually something that Microsoft was pissed at because they have this long-standing partnership with OpenAI, but the best ChatGPT app is actually on Mac rather than on Windows. And that's partially because Microsoft is trying to push their own like co-pilot bullshit, and ChatGPT was like, you know what, we actually want to have our own separate app. So, and then I guess their developers were just more familiar with Mac development. Ducky Boy, you haven't been here in a while. Yeah, I agree. I actually remember you because of the funny name. Welcome back. So what exactly does Mark Gurman mention about AI? Again, this will be shorter. It's not as interesting to me as like the rebranding, whether we're talking about the numbers or even like Lake Tahoe. Again, Lake Tahoe, whether or not that actually means much or it's just a coincidence or it's because it's known for its reflections, that's not as important to me. However, with AI, it really becomes less and less important to me because I feel like that the criticisms week in, week out are always the same, right? Oh, Apple had to delay Apple Intelligence. By the way, Apple did not have to delay Apple Intelligence. Apple delayed Siri, one aspect of Apple Intelligence, and it's very likely that it's still coming out this year. So it's like a 9-month delay or something like that. So the message was clear. Apple may have been behind, but it wouldn't be for long. That's Mark Gurman's takeaway from like last year's WWDC. Then by August, when developers got their hands on the first beta version, the narrative began to fall apart. Basically, it couldn't compete with what OpenAI delivered with ChatGPT or Google delivers with Gemini. I would argue this is an ahistoric viewpoint, not because the objective comparison would put Apple in the same league. I'm not saying that at all. But specifically about Google, Google was embarrassing themselves left and right with AI back in the day, right? Around that same time, they launched like their image generation feature that focused in an absurd degree on diversity, right? To the point where you asked it to draw Nazis and it drew them as like indigenous people or something like that. Google's search results that were combined with Google Gemini were notoriously terrible. One example for that, for example, is that it recommended you put glue on your pizza so your cheese better stick to the dough. And Gemini still struggles to tell you the year we are in. So often if you ask it, oh, is it 2025? It will tell you, no, it's 2024. Or it might tell you, I don't know, because it's using older training data. So depending on what it randomly decided, it might give you literally the wrong number, the wrong result for that. And the other major shortcoming is that Google Gemini, as a voice assistant, for months and months was behind Siri in regular system interactions because it wasn't fully merged with Google Assistant, right? So things like calendar entries, messages, alarms and timers, right? All that basic stuff that goes back to Siri from 2011, that stuff was either broken or even completely missing in Google Gemini until they, like, 4 or 5 months ago, finally merged it completely with Google Assistant functionality. So this idea that Apple just looked so terrible next to Google is just not true. And of course, ChatGPT is not really even designed to be like a system controller yet. Ducky Boy saying, I don't know if Apple ever will be ahead with AI. True, Google had some issues too. And I'm not saying that to like lift Apple up, right? Oh, Google had issues, right? But I am saying everyone had issues. Like ChatGPT 3.5-ish, right? that was when it finally got good enough for a lot of the tasks that people currently associate with ChatGPT, right? And even then, right, the best models now are hidden behind like a $200 subscription. So I'm not saying that Apple will catch up with the chatbot aspect of AI. I don't think Apple is interested in that. Again, just as I said, Apple is not interested in making your a search engine, right? Or Apple isn't interested in making you a YouTube competitor. So, but again, just like I know people will be like the novelty. By the way, one thing that I find funny, like the way Mark Gurman talks about Google, to me is actually misleading. I have actually found everyone in the regular space who uses AI, they basically only exclusively refer to it as ChatGPT, right? There is no Google effect, right? Where sometimes every search engine will be referred to as Google, right? Granted, that is 92% of the market, but nevertheless. Or how every gaming console used to be referred to as Nintendo, right? Because people kind of thought, oh, Nintendo is the only player. Like, Google is not thus far using its, like, incredible customer reach with the search engine and YouTube too well. I think they're somewhat now better, and they are trying to also do more system level stuff, which does help definitely, as they are the Android platform holder. But I think that it will take Apple only one swoop of new Siri features and maybe a Siri rebranding to say, oh, but you know who has like the most comfortable AI when it comes to like interacting with your actual operating system? It's us, because we have the best control over hardware, software, and services. Sure, we might not be able to write big essays for you, right? Go to that for ChatGPT. We have an image generator, but that image generator is free. It's on device. It's pretty basic. However, we integrated with fun stuff like Genmoji, right? And if you want similar stuff, but from a different company than OpenAI, go to Google, right? I don't think that that's a bad outcome for Apple. I think that's the same outcome we are seeing in many different facets. When Spotify came out, they became the leader of the music subscription market. And Apple came out, and Apple Music is pretty big, pretty competitive. But by all accounts, Amazon's own subscription service is probably not too far behind, right? So Apple does not have quite the same lead as they once did with iTunes, right? Did it that hurt Apple in any way? Did people say, oh, I don't need Apple hardware anymore to access music because Spotify is on every platform? No, they didn't. And the same thing will happen with AI. They will say, oh, I have Gemini and ChatGPT and Claude and whatever to choose from on iOS. And for the system level stuff, I have Siri. Well, what exactly am I losing out on? In fact, if I really need those specific things, I have now the action button, right? To like map those AI assistants to even like a physical hardware button. Or I can combine it with the double tap and triple tap back gestures, right? So if I still want to have my action button free for something else. It's absolutely mind-blowing to me how people think that because Apple doesn't have an early lead in an industry they're clearly not as interested in, that it will mean some kind of doom for Apple. So Apple launched writing tools, Genmoji, priority notifications, also notification summaries, also image playground, also like the integrated AI with other features. For example, one thing that Apple has always been really good at is predicting the next app you want to open, right? So there's actually a widget for it that you can put on the screen, and it just looks like a two rows of app icons, but they actually dynamically change. And features like that are being combined with Apple's more advanced AI algorithms. Again, the same thing will happen with battery optimization. Obviously, Apple already has battery optimization features in iOS. Now they would go a step beyond and make that based on AI. Again, it's not perfect and it's not as big of a list as the others, but like this idea that because Siri is not leading the pack, it's bad. It's like yeah, Siri hasn't, by the way, Siri hasn't led the pack on like integration with stuff like search and whatever for quite a while. That Google Assistant was ahead in that. He's saying Siri was meant to sit at the center of Apple intelligence. Again, that's his own perspective. I'm not saying it's necessarily wrong, but that's really not how Apple built it up. Yes, some of the most exciting features of it, especially stuff like on-screen awareness and deep personal context, that those things are working through Siri. But I would also argue that a lot of those features will work even very well if you're already inside an app, right? If my messages also know all my calendar entries, my reminders. So if I if I type to somebody like, oh, let's meet there, but like my messages tell me, well, you actually have an event there. I'm not saying that that's a feature that's coming anytime soon, but like to me, actually interacting with a voice assistant is one of the most cumbersome things about AI, right? Like, so again, I have set my piece on that regard, but whatever. So, with the 1 year anniversary of Apple Intelligence approaching, it should be noted Apple's 1 year anniversary of the announcement is going to be dubbed up, but it's actually still like 3 months off until we get like the first like actual 1 year anniversary of AI. In fact, more than that, right? It didn't launch until October. It needs to build some AI buzz at June 9th Worldwide Developers Conference. Again, this is completely going against what consumers are telling. There are memes about every Google I/O, about everything, about every Microsoft developer should build or whatever they call it, right? People count like the numbers they mentioned AI or even the full word, right? Like artificial intelligence and whatever. People want also to see new software. People want to see new features for iPadOS. The idea that Apple, I believe he mentions it later on that this year's dub will be smaller because it's not as AI focused. That to me is ridiculous because people have been asking for a redesign at around the iOS 10 time, and people have been asking for more iPadOS productivity features basically since like iOS 7 or something like that, right? Definitely ever since the rebranding to iPadOS. So I'm just flabbergasted why again he's like trying to inject things that yes, analysts might be asking for, and yes, investors might want to see because they throw out their mouth whenever somebody mentions AI and it increases the value of the stock. But realistically, for regular consumers, not really. And he also says like OpenAI struck a blockbuster partnership. Like literally ask anybody like who is not a tech nerd, right? For one, who is Apple's big design guy, right? At best they will say you, oh, it's some British dude, right? They will be like, well, do you know he left? They will be like, oh, really? When did that happen? You tell them like, well, that happened like 4 or 5 years ago. They're like, oh yeah, well, guess Apple didn't go under. And they will be like, well, who's he partnering with now? And if you're honest, right? If you're not trying to like bullshit them, you'll tell, oh, he made like some luxury small products with his company, right? And now he's being bought by by the guys who make ChatGPT. They're like, ChatGPT, but ChatGPT is AI software. And it's like, yeah, but you'll be able to talk into a product. And they're like, so the way that I talk into my iPhone? You don't get it, but it's not going to have a screen. So you can wear it around your neck. Like, it's not going to have a screen. The screen that shows me the response. Yeah, but it will always show look at the camera around you, so you can do like visual intelligence stuff. You're telling me I'm filming everyone I am around with, and it's constantly analyzing everything I'm doing. That's not creepy at all, right? That's the response you get. like calling it blockbuster, yes, it made for some big headlines, especially since it's like a $6.5 billion acquisition. It's a big thing, but blockbuster, Jesus. Well, Google made major stride at the I/O event. I loved it. Nothing Google mentioned is actually so big that it warrants like a specific thing, right? He mentioned it's allowing its large language models to tap into personal data, but he doesn't actually talk about the final feature here. And in fact, at last year's Google I/O, they talked about exactly that. And it took them a year until they talked more about it, where it actually looks like it's a feature that's seemingly working coherently. Apple needs a comeback in a market they never tried to compete, in a market that is still extremely young, and in a market where Apple is clearly not trying to make a chatbot alternative. Okay, but that probably won't be happening. Good. Let them talk about other stuff. So there are also signs the event will be smaller scale. The company desires to make up for that next year at WWDC 2026, when it hopes it can try to convince consumers that it's an AI innovator. That's risky, though. Taking a gap year is hard to do when your competitors are moving at like speed. Nobody, by the way, nobody's talking about it being a gap year. Apple still has to launch all the three new features for Siri. Then the entire backend of Siri will have to be ported to LLM. There are new features coming to every single app that it's built, that is integrating more of Apple's own AI stuff. Apple itself is allowing developers and third-party service providers to integrate with their own AI. So similar how ChatGPT currently is integrated with Siri, Apple will soon allow Google Gemini to do the same. And there is actually rumors that that partnership might go even deeper. But then also, like, think about features like visual intelligence, right? How many people are actually using it now that it's out there, right? And it actually doesn't have any Apple downsides, right? It integrates with Google reverse image search and with ChatGPT image analysis, right? So it's technically like state of the art, and I have not used it in like ever since it launched. My most used AI feature is Genmoji. Again, it's like such a misunderstanding what consumers are actually asking for, especially at a reasonable timeline, because it takes a while to actually like get consumers to like change their behavioral patterns. But whatever. Blah blah blah. Apple's own foundation models will be open to third-party developers. That makes sense. If you want to run something specifically on device, something that's specifically optimized for the hardware, right? It's also pretty big for an on-device model, 3 billion parameters. I wonder if they will allow for like potentially for something that or for something bigger on like macOS or something like that, or if, for example, they will just scale it automatically up to with memory, right? Now, 3 billion parameters is extremely small in comparison, of course, to cloud-based solutions. But usually on smartphones, we are more like talking about 1 billion to 2 billion parameters, maybe. Plus, if Apple actually delivers like 12 gigs of RAM on the iPhone 17 Air, Pro Max, right? There's a chance that that one could be up like to 5 billion. Granted, it also needs more computational power, but yeah, who knows? So it will be able to design custom app features, marking an important but incremental step in Apple's AI journey. There's a new power management mode, translate app improvements, and several existing features in apps like Safari and Photos will be AI powered, basically rebranded. That being said, it is good because don't forget that something like cleanup is actually like a feature that for many for like whether you're looking on Android and Google Photos or whatever, right? And the way Samsung implements it, they could be like algorithm based rather than AI, but instead they are AI partially because generative AI is used to fill in the gaps, right? Some very basic form of that I'm sure could be happening without LLMs even. But when you look, for example, how Samsung will like redraw your full face, right? If you make a selfie, if you make like a mirror selfie with your phone in front of your face, and you delete your phone through cleanup or retouch or whatever it's called on there, right? It will actually draw your face from underneath it. So it's actually accessing your other photos or shit like that, because it's definitely not like imagining that from the ground up. And yeah, it's using the cloud solution for that to make it look even remotely feasible. So yeah, I'm just saying that Apple's implementation here is different. It's for smaller stuff. Apple has always valued the real nature of a photo. That's why they haven't gone quite all out on like super saturated colors. This is why they haven't gone all out on like actually allowing like image playground to generate like real images. Instead they have like the cartoon style and the sketch style and whatever. So yeah, the idea that it gets just ignored time and time again, that Apple's approach might be different, is kind of stupid to me. Yeah, of course. So we do have. Oh yeah, by the way, we do have the AI doctor stuff. I believe that was predicted for this year. So now it's apparently a 2026 feature. LLM Siri, of course. There's also a revamped version of its Shortcuts app, which today lets users create actions such as launching certain features within apps or playing a particular playlist. The new version will let consumers create those actions using Apple Intelligence model. Delays may push it to 2026. This is actually interesting because I feel like this is the way to make it's like the Mandalorian. This is the way, right? To make people actually use Shortcuts. I think Shortcuts is a good app, but it's very pro in its design, right? It's very much like, it's not user unfriendly, but it takes some effort to fully understand it. I feel like if you can use your voice, if you can do it with Siri directly and say like, I want my camera to activate when I double press the action button, right? Let's say Apple opens up double click on the action button, right? That's much more comfortable to even do that outside the Shortcuts app, of course, to do it even outside the Settings app. Or like, let's combine it with the double back tap gestures, right? Because those are a little bit more difficult to find in the system than the action button customization, right? So if I could voice that to my Shortcuts app or to Siri to talk to my Shortcuts app, yes, that would be, in my opinion, a pretty big deal. But also, like, do you see how niche we are getting, right? The amount of features that people actually need and will regularly use out of all of this, it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. This is interesting because honestly, I haven't heard too much about it for a while. A ChatGPT chatbot competitor, so this is things he listed Apple is working on, that can pull in data from the open web, which some employees have dubbed knowledge. The early project is being led by Robbie Walker, who saw Siri removed from his command several weeks ago. It was moved over to Vision Pro creator Mike Rockwell. Employees familiar with the work say it's already been plagued by some of the same problems that delayed the Siri overhaul. This I actually don't get. I assume that this is shit that Apple works on to kind of almost trick investors. Not because they will announce it, but because leakers will talk about it and people will think, oh my God, Apple's entering the search engine market or whatever. Like, I don't see why we need this, to be quite honest. Even from the very beginning, right? When Siri came out and did image search, they partnered with Bing, and later they switched it to Google search, right? Like, knowledge for Siri was not an Apple internal thing. It was integrated with Wolfram Alpha and their knowledge engine, right? like I'm just wondering, where is this like shift coming from, where like Eddie Q is supposedly like supposed to take on like 5 new services just for Siri, right? And I'm like, so you want Apple to burn the same tens of billions of dollars as Google and Microsoft? You want them to go back on their environmental protection goals, right? Like their switch to clean energy, which both Google, Microsoft, and other companies have now kind of like subtly backtracked on by saying, oh, you know what, we're gonna need more coal and whatever, right? And preferably we would need fusion reactors. I'm like, okay, great, so your technology requires a complete breakthrough. But like, yeah, it's whatever you want to say. I am covering this because AI is an important part of Apple's future. It's an important part of the future of consumer technology. But in my opinion, it's just not worth the all that backlash, right? Especially in a year where Apple is doing a lot, right? He's calling this a gap year, where specifically he's referring to DubDub. But when you think about it, it's a gap year, and now this gives me like MaxTech vibes, right? Where they call like the M2 chip a stopgap or whatever, even though in some ways it delivers a better performance increase than the M3 did over the M2, but whatever. But like this gap year is going to coincide with a redesign to every Apple major operating system, bringing consistency between certain like functionalities between all those devices, and making iPadOS more macOS like in its productivity. Those are things that people have been asking for way longer than they have asked for anything related to AI. So again, this is now my last word on AI, hopefully today. But I guess thank you, Mark Gurman. I mean, we rant about you sometimes, but we love you still. There is definitely interesting stuff that you still provide, like that macOS Tahoe rebranding. Let's see if that actually ends up being correct. I'm sorry I'm sweating a lot. It's incredibly humid. We were promised like a huge thunderstorm starting at 7 p.m. It's now 7:20. Hopefully it starts at any minute, so you can finally breathe freely. So that's about it for today's like new rumors, and I guess also to a degree summaries about DubDub. That is not all. So there is small stuff, by the way, happening all the time in Apple land, like Instagram finally getting an iPad app. I hope that also means that Threads gets an iPad app, because I do actually like to engage with social media more on iPad. Like, for example, all my Discord stuff I manage primarily on my iPad. Yeah, and obviously that coincides with the recent WhatsApp iPad version that was launched by Meta or Facebook. And hopefully that just means that Meta has fully given up on like holding down the iPad in some silly way, believing that people will use those scaled up phone apps or go to the web, where they probably want to have more control over your data. I don't know if they will also try to maybe bring their stuff to third-party stores, especially in like Europe. Because they really don't like Apple's like privacy sheets, and right, that tell you how much data Facebook likes to collect. But yeah, at least with everything negative that I kind of like cover about Facebook occasionally, this is one of the good things, I guess. But the actual big rumor in the Apple land that I would like to cover today is iPhone 17 rumors. Now, iPhone 17 is obviously the base model this year. It's the model that is going to be the least exciting, even though it might end up being like a surprise hit, similar to how the iPhone 16 is now outselling the 16 Pro and 16 Pro Max. But this is coming from Jeff Poo, who is not the best Apple leaker. Usually I associate him not even with the quality of his leaks, but I kind of associate him with being second or third after people like Ross Young, Mark Gurman, Min-Chi Kuo, right? Even like Digital Chat Station and like some of the other like Weibo-based Chinese leakers. I usually see them launching like rumors and leaks first. And then Jeff Poo is kind of known to be more of a summary kind of analyst. He does sometimes provide new info, but when he does, it's usually not the biggest kind of detail. And this one is actually interesting because it is contradicted in at least one of its aspects by one of the most major Apple leakers. In fact, this is a rumor that we've covered in the last stream. So specifically, we talk about the iPhone 17 spec sheet here that he provides. And what's fascinating here, well, he actually contradicts other sources in multiple ways. But first of them all is the use of a 6.1-inch display. So if you watched my last stream, you will know that Ross Young, the notoriously best leaker in the Apple community, because he focuses on one type of component, the display, right? That one actually says that it's going to move up to 6.3 inches. We, of course, know it's going to be an LTPO screen. It's going to support ProMotion, high refresh rate, right? Going to be a pretty nice screen, probably match the iPhone 16 Pro generation in a lot of ways. But here's Jeff Poo a few days later, and now promising you the same 6.1-inch screen that we've obviously had on previous base model iPhones. And going against Ross Young is not necessarily the best thing you want to do when it comes to delivering display rumors. Next, he talks about the chip being an A18 chip rather than A19 or A19 Pro. So he affirms that A19 and A19 Pro are based on the newer Note N3P. And obviously, if this is going to use the A18, it's going to keep with the N3 Note. He also confirms, and this is something that we've heard for a little bit now from I believe Min-Chi Kuo was first, but others have after that talked about it too, that the iPhone 17 Air is not going to be an 8 gigs of RAM device, but rather have the same 12 gigabytes as the Pro and the Pro Max. What's interesting to me is he talks about the Pro and the Pro Max having LPDDR5X, so I assume that's 8533 megatransfers per second memory or higher. And he talks about the iPhone 17 Air and the iPhone 17 using LPDDR5. If we look at the memory that's in the iPhone, in devices with the A18 chip and the A18 Pro and the base M4, you will find that this is 7,500 megatransfers per second memory. So interestingly, he says that the 17 Air will have more memory, but it will be slower memory. Whether it means it actually uses the same type of memory, or maybe it's the same memory like this, but underclocked a little bit to like minimize power consumption. Don't forget that shit happens. The Nintendo Switch is a very good example. For example, it will actually use 8533 LPDDR5X memory, like as a pure hardware spec. Then in docked mode, where it's still not quite able to fully utilize that hardware in terms of cooling and whatever, it's actually going to go down to 6,400 megatransfers. So that's base LPDDR5 speeds, right? With 7,500 megatransfers, it sometimes is like argued, oh, is it 5X already or is it 5? But 6,400 is definitely LPDDR5. But then even more importantly, in a mobile mode, right, in handheld mode, it will actually, the switch will go down to 4,200 megatransfers per second. So that would actually bring us down 2 generations or 1 full generations, depending on how you count it, to LPDDR4X speed. So that's the kind of memory that we had in the iPhone 15 and below. So I couldn't tell you, obviously, which one we're talking about here. Is it the same memory like this, but underclocked? Is it the same memory as this, but just more of it? But that is something he at least outlines, which is interesting. He also talks and kind of confirms again something we have known for a while: a higher resolution front camera, 24 megapixels, 48 megapixel, obviously, on the back cameras for everything. 7P system. So that unfortunately doesn't tell us too much. because obviously Apple can use a different mix of like lenses that are glass or plastic to make maybe the base models less premium, less expensive to build than the Pros. Obviously, he confirms that the 17 Air will have a single camera on the back. Also, the base model is keeping a 12 megapixel ultra wide, so we're not moving over to the 48 megapixel ultra wide that we've had now on the Pro models. And he confirms that we're getting a 48 megapixel periscope camera. He does not say which kind of zoom level it will offer. So right now we're at 5x optical zoom at 120 millimeters. There have been rumors that Apple would offer like ultra zoom or whatever at like 200 millimeters. Whether or not that actually means on a hardware level, which is kind of what that initial rumor said, or that Apple is just going to use 48 megapixels on the sensor to zoom in 2x, so going from 5x to 10x basically. But yeah, it's hard to tell. Then we actually get more stuff that is contradicting the other components, which he talks about the structured light of the Face ID system, right? Structured light is the way he refers to the meta lens technology that's supposed to make Face ID smaller. Now, if you remember the way those leaks have been developing over time, you will actually remember that the only iPhone that was rumored for quite a while to get this was the iPhone 17 Pro Max, right? So kind of the biggest design change this year would be happening on the Pro Max, because it would be the only phone that gets like a change on the back and on the front, right? Probably something to stick out versus the iPhone 17 Air, which gets like also a bigger redesign on the back, not just having the different camera layout like the Pros, but also getting a lot thinner. But now he's saying all of those all iPhones this year will have structured light Face ID systems. He does not specifically specify that it's gonna make Face ID smaller. But then again, why would Apple use a more advanced, logistically more difficult to get and more expensive system if they're not gonna apply its main benefit, which is gonna to make Face ID smaller? Riley, the chip rumor is boring. It's, to me, I actually have to say, I don't care what chip is in the very base iPhone model, right? I think, like, looking, for example, and I mentioned that in the beginning of the stream, my niece got herself an iPhone 16, right? It's an A18 chip, 8 gigs of RAM, pretty good for what it is right now. No promotion, for example, she doesn't care about it, right? Decent to good battery life, maybe not quite Pro Max territory. But, like, if she got an iPhone 17 a year later for the same kind of money as she now gets an iPhone 16, and it had ProMotion, for example, a better selfie camera, but it kept, because of that, the same chip, right? Well, and even if we go by Ross Young, it would actually be a larger screen and everything. I would not be pissed off or like stop recommending this. I don't think that this really matters. Now, on the iPhone 17 Air, I actually don't care about the performance aspect of the A19, as I hope that just the switch to N3P, hopefully a newer graphics architecture or whatever, would actually allow the iPhone 17 Air to still have good battery life, right? So that's the thing I care most about. I also don't care about the raw performance aspect of the 17 Air. It's only here where I'm like, oh, I want it to be future-proof, right? So give me a lot of memory. I want it to be high-performant in games. Not for me, right? I don't even play games on my iPhone that much. I play them when I do on my Mac, really, for the most part. By the way, guys, we have a few more people watching. We've been streaming for about an hour. I want to shout you guys out for subscribing, liking, sharing, commenting. Just support the stream. It helps us attract new people. It helps us grow the community. community. So however you choose to interact, it's all very much appreciated. But just hit the like button, leave a small comment, just a hi, tell me who you are. It all helps, believe me. It made sense when there was no Pro chip. It's difficult, right? Like you could say, oh, it would be A18 versus A19. But then again, you have to consider there are also questions still about supply chains, right? Now, the cost aspect, I would argue, is pretty minuscule between like an N3E and an N3P chip. But consider what it could mean, like, for example, for the supply for these models, right? Let's say N3P is not really that high in supply right now. So cutting off a model that has actually been really high performant in sales recently is pretty impressive, pretty important. Right? Obviously not impressive. Yeah, but like I'm just trying to tell you, there are things here that are contradicting other leakers. That A18 rumor for the base iPhone 17, it's new. The reason why I'm not yet saying it's contradicted by other leakers is because other leakers have not yet come forward to give us basically either like an agreement or disagreement, right? When it comes to the Face ID, it goes hard against other stuff that we've heard, and the display stuff goes hard against one of the best leakers we have, Ross Young. So you can take it how you want. Charging is outlined at 35 watts. Whether that means it's actually faster or not, there is a difference with how iPhones charge, if they actually are simultaneously consuming power, plus a small peak of 35 watts if it's only maintained for a few minutes. It's pretty meaningless. Whether or not Apple sticks to mainly 27 watts kind of being like the default maximum, or this actually moves us to 35 watts, I don't know. My assumption is they will probably give us slightly higher peak wattage, especially on the Pro Max, which will have the biggest battery ever in an iPhone. Whether it's going to be by much or not, I couldn't tell you. Modems, the iPhone 17 Air, he talks about it using C1 modems. Interestingly, he says Qualcomm or Apple, so I'm not sure if that means he is uncertain himself or whether it could be both. And when it comes to the casing, he outlines a pretty, at this point now, like steadfast rumor that the Pros are switching back to aluminum. Of course, the base model, or switching back, it hasn't actually been ever since the iPhone 10. We haven't had aluminum premium iPhones. But the base model, of course, sticks with aluminum. But the iPhone 17 Air, now assuming this is for structural rigidity, a similar decision to what Samsung made for the Galaxy S25 Edge, it is using a titanium chassis. So interesting. My hope for the use of aluminum is that it's going to primarily benefit cooling, radio frequency transparencies, and that despite a larger battery and a thicker product overall, we're not going to see a huge weight increase, maybe slightly, maybe we're even going to stay even with last year. And then, yeah, the iPhone 17 Air, this is also probably going to be something that also pushes its price definitely closer to $1,000 than like the $800 we associate with the base iPhone models. Riley, that would also make sense if it was 2 nanometer. There was a rumor saying A19 would be N3P, when the A19 Pro was rumored to come in 2 nanometer. Yes. So this is also, of course, important. We don't actually know the final branding here in the end, right? There is still some form of chance that we get something 2 nanometer based or something much crazier. And so Apple might, they're not going from iOS 18 to iOS 19, right? So maybe they will have like a crazy chip rebranding here as well. But this is not based on leaks or anything, so I'm always careful to not give you guys too much of my own speculation without specifically labeling it as my speculation. And I didn't want to do that while I was reading this report page, basically from Jeff Poo. So again, this is pretty controversial at this point. So Face ID, structured light or meta lens, therefore smaller Face ID cutout. not sure about that, Chief. 6.1 inch display on the iPhone 17 rather than the 6.3 inches, confirmed by Ross Young, right? The full switch to aluminum, except for the model that used to be on aluminum, which is, of course, the Plus model transitioning into the Air. Some RAM discrepancies, but then again, the rumor from Minchiquo was always that Apple was going to give the base iPhone 17 more RAM if they can source it, right? So not sure. I mean, again, this does go against previous rumor that it's an A19 chip, but who knows? So I guess if Apple keeps the iPhone 16 in the lineup, so the main differences between those, right? It's not going to be the chip. It's not going to be the amount of memory. It's going to be a better front-facing camera, potentially a larger screen, again, if we go more by what Ross Young said, but a ProMotion screen, and that's kind of it, right? I don't guess that we're going to get like a huge battery life increase. I mean, this isn't even using like the C1 modem. I guess what's interesting, he does not point out the Wi-Fi modem here in question. He focuses only on the 5G modem. So that is one thing that's supposed where we are switching from Broadcom to an Apple-designed Wi-Fi 7 and Bluetooth modem. However, we already have Wi-Fi 7 in the iPhone 16 family. It's not peak download speed Wi-Fi 7. It maxes out at the same 2.4 gigabits per second as the Wi-Fi 6E modem that Apple had in like the iPhone 15 Pro series, that they still have on like iPads and Macs. So yeah, some details are still missing. Obviously, there are also always features for speakers, haptics, microphones, all of those like experience features, right? Those quality of life features that will not be top of the list. So they can always change. But if Apple really keeps around the iPhone 16 in the lineup and it's by MSRP only $100 less expensive, then I would argue ProMotion, Face ID, better modem in some way. Yeah, that justifies an $100 premium, but maybe not quite $200. So maybe Apple, maybe for $200, it would actually need to be in Apple's eyes themselves, more like an A19 chip or something like that. So maybe keeping cost low in the iPhone 17, saying, you know what, the A18 is overkill for the vast majority of people, especially when you look at stuff like single core performance. It's still going to be compatible with AAA games. There's also, of course, the rumor change, and this is not outlined by Jeff Poo, unfortunately, that all iPhones in some way are going to get better cooling. Specifically on the Pros, we've been talking about vapor chamber heat sinks, and potentially on the iPhone 17 Air, which makes sense given that this is a product that will desperately need all the cooling it can get. But also some rumors have said that the base model could also get it too. So basically Apple leverages like their huge scale, right, to order, right, instead of saying, oh, we're going to keep it completely exclusive to the Pro models, though I still assume that they will have much bigger vapor chambers, right? But you know what? We're going to order so much like vapor chamber material and shit like that. We are actually also going to bring it to the iPhone 17. It's going to make it cooler than the iPhone 16. Might be necessary for ProMotion, stuff like that. Not really, given that we had ProMotion going back to the iPhone 13 Pro, right? Maybe we're going to enable slightly faster charging and whatever. So all of those small changes combine to, in my opinion, still make a pretty worthwhile product. However, again, we'll have to discuss once we have more leaks and rumors concerning these products if Jeff Poo is even remotely correct on some of it, because it's the first time I ever see a leaker like push out a report like this that has like 4 or 5 contested features, right? So even the memory amount, the memory type, the meta lens tech, the material choices, the chip differences, the display size, right? It is a pretty big list of differences to a lot of other leakers. Riley, the iPhone Pro needs better cooling and battery. Everything else is irrelevant. Well, good for us, I guess. I am buying the 17 Pro Max this year. By every rumor we have gotten, we are getting better cooling and a larger battery. We might not be getting breakthrough battery technology like silicon carbon, so simply because of the amount, the volume that Apple has to order of those products. But then again, Apple might be the only guy in town using N3P this year. There is a chance that basically everyone else will still be on N3E. So at least from that, Apple could also gain like 5% more energy efficiency versus a lot of other solutions, maybe a little bit less or more, depending on how good of a node this ends up being. But this is fascinating because I rarely react to Jeff Poo that much. And usually it's kind of on the down low in terms of my reactions, but this is probably the most controversial leak that I have seen Jeff Poo do, not necessarily because any of this like is completely senseless or completely devoid of context of other leaks, but it's like really contradicting a lot of other stuff that we have heard. But I believe that's about it for the Apple stuff today. So the Instagram app, we covered that. We covered all the Mark Gurman summaries by going directly to the source. macOS Tahoe, of course. VisionOS changes. All of that is pretty like summary based at this point. Riley, how would Elite 2 get the rumored 30% improvement then? To be honest, I don't care about those rumored numbers. I've seen such numbers be wrong so often. Plus, we often see like, again, when you look at Geekervan and you look at where those chips are like achieved their highest end levels, and it's at like in the 18 watt range or whatever, right? With like their extreme like manual cooling basically. But even then again, 30%, like we've heard similar stuff about their graphics and whatever, and sometimes they do. The 8 Elite definitely had a nice GPU uplift. And then in previous generations, there was a lot of like benefits that came from like using better memory, which didn't happen that much with the 8 Elite, so maybe that could be part of the puzzle, but I really couldn't tell you. But even then, N3P is not even close to enabling 30% gain, so there would have to be either an acceptance of much, much more outrageous like power consumption, or it would be a really big architectural change. I mean, when you think about it, we always go here. 30 watt, 5 gigahertz with N3E. Yeah, probably. Like, and there's also the question when we look at leaks like this, some part of that might also concern like the X Elite 2, right? So just because the cores might technically try to get up to 5 gigahertz doesn't mean that we are really gonna get that. But I wanted to show you like the Vivo X200 Ultra review, and for one, there are a few things that I want to praise. For one, unlike the recent Samsung devices, it is actually a very bright screen device. So 1800 nits, more than enough, in my opinion, as long as it's sustainable, right? Battery life, we see some weird back and forths where the X200 Pro has like better battery life than the Ultra. That might be standard setting stuff, but then again, the thing where the biggest difference lies here is almost like the call time, which again, to me is meaningless. So let's take it away. But then the Vivo X200 Pro still has a sizable lead. So GSM Arena is not always perfect. I always point to their iPhone 16e battery testing, which goes actually very well outside of what a lot of others have said. The speakers also, like, they seem to praise the speakers in a way. They are like in terms of like their like official metrics, right? But I always found it funny when they actually describe the sound. They actually like really shit on it a little bit. Oddly enough, the three sound quite differently. The X200 Ultra isn't necessarily the best of them. We're not particular fans of its somewhat clunky output, right? This is why with speakers, I never care too much about the peak volume level or even like, I guess like the frequency response range that much. Like I really care about the end user experience. And to me, Samsung has actually been notorious for being the only one outside of like some of those like crazy like front speaker phones, which really are not mainstream, that competes with the iPhones in that level. And then in fact, when you go down to the regular iPhones, you really get nothing quite that gives you the same speakers, right? So on the Pro iPhones, it's the Galaxy S Ultra that competes, and then on the base iPhones, it's really nothing that quite competes. But granted, they are pretty expensive for being like lower end product. The question is how it's already pretty maxed out for N3. Yeah, like in my opinion, the X Elite is absolutely maxed out for N3E. That being said, they could do a big architectural change that changes that. Oh wait, the other rumor a month ago was going to be based on Samsung 2 nanometer. Yeah, this always goes back and forth because part of it is also companies talk to each other. So I wouldn't put it past Qualcomm to consider it. But then again, whether it actually makes it in time for the 8 Elite 2 or if it's more of an X Elite 2 thing, it's really hard. Like also like what happened by the way with the freaking X Elite at this point, right? Are we really not getting a successor this year, at least based on like the latest GPU generation? The entire X Elite shit was so disappointing. But yeah, one thing that I wanted to mention here, the X200 Ultra here. So it gives you good performance, right? Like pretty much in line with what you expect. Single core performance, multi-core performance to be on the 8 Elite, some of the best Antutu results, 3D Mark and Solar Bay results. So nothing bad here, right? But then when you look at it, now, this is wildlife test. Unfortunately, this is how GSM Arena tests their sustained performance. I have no idea why they haven't switched this to like Steel Nomad Lite. I guess the only downside to Steel Nomad is that it would exclude devices with less than 8 gigs of memory. But that's really such a minuscule amount of products. At this point, that's like the very cheapest Androids, and that's like iPhones going back to like the iPhone 15 and 15 Plus, right? Yeah, but when it comes to stability, right, you get like half of the max performance of the chip. In fact, a little bit less than half. So once again, I am just a little bit confronted. I don't mind having a higher peak than sustained. That just makes sense. Phones are passively cooled. That's all fine. But I find it weird when it's like it drops just so hard. At what point would it have been more economical to make a chip that only performs up to like 5,000 but then still gives you like 3300 sustained? Did I forget Gen 1 Samsung to Gen 1 Plus TSMC, 25 performance and 30? Yeah, but that was very different. Like that was a very big node jump. Samsung's 2 nanometer node is very much a competitor to TSMC's 3 nanometer node. I don't know at what point it would, like, except for cost, it would ever be smarter to consider Samsung 2 nanometer and then potentially be like really fucked by their potentially low yields versus switching to like N3P, right? Even if Samsung's like latest 2 nanometer or whatever would be better than N3E, it's barely matching it in some ways. So would it really be that worth it instead of paying more at TSMC, a company that you know you can trust and stuff like that? But yeah, it's different from the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 to the 8 Gen 1 Plus that switched from Samsung to TSMC. And I mean, we saw even bigger gains, for example, when the RTX 3000 family switched from Samsung 8 nanometer to TSMC 4 nanometer, we got from that, I believe, roughly like a 4 times increase in density and double the efficiency, right? So we're looking at 2.5 notes of improvements. But that's not really common. Yeah, but the reason I wanted to show you this, right? So again, the actual number to me means little because for one, Wildlife Extreme is not a very good test and everything, but it's the sustained number of 50% that shows me this chip is really more of like a tablet chip or even like a low-level laptop chip, like maybe a passively cooled laptop, than a smartphone chip. I trust TSMC 100 times over Intel and Samsung. Yeah, with Intel, like all those promises over 18A, I really want to see finally something because right now I just don't care. If N3P comes out before 18A and then 18A comes out and it's better than N3P, but it only has the supply to like only be used on like Intel CPUs, not even all Intel GPUs or whatever, right? What percentage of just the iPhone Pro usage is that? Because N3P is gonna be on the iPhone Air, the iPhone, well, it could be on the entire iPhone lineup, but at the very least, it's going to be on the iPhone Airs and the iPhone Pros this year. It's going to be on the M5 generation of chips. The M5 generation of chips is not going to just be in Macs, but it's also Apple now finally improving their server infrastructure to get more AI into the Apple Intelligence into the cloud, right? So that's how much supply just N3P has just for Apple, right? That's not considering still that N3E is going to power basically most of Qualcomm and shit like that. And NVIDIA is using a 4 nanometer with potentially some 3 nanometer for their server class RTX 5000 variants that will come out later. But like with Intel, it's like, oh, so you have like what 20 times less like supply of 18A, and you're 10% better maybe than N3P. And it has to, because it's only for you, it has to be paired with your CPU generation architecture, which has been pretty disappointing for a little while. Yeah, it's really not. It's not making me too crazy excited. But like one last comparison I wanted to bring up here, obviously. So the iPhone 16 Pro Max, when you look at its performance, again, don't look at the actual final number, right? About 3D Wildlife Extreme, right? But the iPhone, okay, so this is another, oh yeah, this is Wildlife rather than Extreme. So in Wildlife, wait, did Apple score 90% stability here? Best loop score. Jesus, that's impressive. Am I missing something? Long-term load. So CPU was throttled to 77.5%. Yeah, that's all better than the Vivo. And that one is specifically designed to be like an ultra product with the best kind of cooling that you can get. What's its CPU sustained performance? In CPU, it gives 60% of its maximum. So that basically explains all the difference in like why this goes to up like 10,000 in multi-core. The iPhone roughly goes up to like 8,500. Right, but then the iPhone sustains 77% of it, and this sustains only 60% of it, right? Which actually would put it now below the iPhone's performance level. And again, this is a vapor chamber product. So what Apple could do here is actually pretty impressive. Now, again, I'm not saying that at 4 or 5 watts, which is where a lot of gaming power consumption is, this will not be potentially more impressive sustained than the iPhone, right? But it is not as much better as some people make it out to be versus the 16 Pro series at the very least. I believe the 15 Pro is worse. I mean, it would make sense just from my own personal experiences with my 15 Pro Max. When it comes to in terms of CPU, it throttled to this. So different results between iOS 16. Okay, so that's probably not too not too representative. GPU 70% stability. Solar base 60%. So they actually ran more tests for the iPhone here. It's a little bit disappointing that they don't have this data to compare to, especially since at least solar base better than Wildlife Extreme. Yeah, but again, we are in a somewhat new era here where there's definitely a push for higher power consumption in pretty much everything, even on Apple's chips, right? M4 will consume more power than M1 on average. It's just it's going to be more efficient on the very low end, and for a lot of tasks where you might not even max out the chip, this is where you're going to feel that at similar performance levels, or tasks that are bottlenecked in some ways, be it memory or just like, you know, a web browser test will also be like limited by just like your connectivity to a web server. This is where you're going to feel the efficiency advantage. Yeah, but some last, because we do like to talk about chips, we do like to talk about some nerdy stuff here on the channel. I do want to briefly bring up, okay, so nothing more Apple stuff. I do want to bring up the supposed Xbox handheld. It's not going to be a big part of the stream. This is a surprisingly long stream for having only like 3 topics, 4 I guess. But what I find interesting here is Microsoft supposedly has been working on kind of 2 consoles, right? So they have an Xbox Series X successor, so that's their more premium, more powerful console, and that is supposedly totally safe. We are getting like a Series 2X or Series X2 or Series XXX or whatever stupid name Microsoft will come up with it. But then Microsoft was personally working on a handheld. Now, Microsoft, similar to how Valve is currently reaching out to ASUS and other companies to build handhelds based on SteamOS, Microsoft is reaching out to companies like ASUS to build handhelds based on Windows. However, they also wanted to make their own handheld that would basically be very much primarily Windows, even if it did allow you to install another operating system, which is what those other handhelds do. It would not be the focus here. Also, Steam, probably very likely installable, since this is going to be Windows-based, would not be the focus as much as the Windows Store, for example. But it seems like Windows was so bad behind the scenes, Riley, I know you like this, that supposedly right now they're only working on those kinds of handhelds through third parties, right? So they thought they need their expertise right now to optimize Windows 11 gaming performance. In fact, we saw devices like from ASUS that can run either Windows or SteamOS, and SteamOS absolutely smokes Windows 11. We can actually go here. Don't worry, guys, I'm not reacting to any more Galaxy S25 Edge stuff. I know I edged you guys enough with this. I got it. You're not interested, which is fine, not even from MKBHD. But like, when you look at it, massive SteamOS expansion is official. SteamOS is finally on other handhelds. But like, there are videos. Oh, here, the Supreme Handheld OS versus Windows. I believe that, oh yeah, Dave2D titled his video, Windows was the problem all along, right? And that to me is not good publicity for Windows on handhelds. It just will push more people to the Steam Deck and to handhelds that support SteamOS now. And Microsoft probably realizes that. So for one, that same product running SteamOS had roughly like 10% more performance. It had better battery life, so it actually consumed less power. And more importantly than all of that, to me personally, on a handheld, is it had way better like standby and sleep modes. So you could actually like click the power button, your device goes into sleep mode, doesn't consume too much power, and when you open it back up, you're back in the game, right? With Windows, it would either close the game or keep using power as if it's like full on, maybe not like the GPU, but like at least the CPU, greatly reducing your battery life. So if you don't keep it charged during the night, it might just like run down its battery. This is crazy, and Asus is now working on a Project Canon product based on Windows 11, and this is supposedly coming out this year. So I guess Microsoft said, you know what, we're gonna have partners here. If those partners launch with products that are in a disastrous state, it's going to be a complete death sentence to any kind of handheld we might do. So let's push our own handheld and focus on making their experience better, and hopefully down the line that actually means that our own handheld can actually launch in a decent state. This is the very ugly, but I like the handles. One of the products that feels the most ergonomic to me, but that's also because it's simply a streaming product, is the PS Portal, because it just has the handles from the DualShock controller, from the DualSense controller, right? And they are actually pretty far away from the actual thin and comfortable screen, right? So now, granted, that is the benefit of it being a streaming device. So it can just put some battery there into chip, and here they can put haptics and whatever. I understand that obviously if you're making a full-on handheld that can actually run games locally, you have different engineering challenges. But this still looks ugly as fuck. I just hope that it has really good speakers thanks to this. This is actually an Xbox logo, which would be very subtle branding. And this is seemingly a 16:9 screen. So unfortunately, a lot of other handhelds have been smarter and have given us like 16:10 screens. But I guess because this is kind of designed to be like an Xbox, and Xbox is designed for like widescreen 16:9 TVs, they went with a 16:9 screen. So that's not, unfortunately, the best decision. But hey, that's probably what you're about to get in the end of next year, at the end of this year. And by 2027, you would be getting some form of Xbox actual console. I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if that gets canceled as well. And ultimately, Microsoft just becomes a third-party publisher and basically a helping hand in developing third-party hardware like this. Maybe they will use the Xbox branding for devices that are built in deep partnership with Microsoft. But honestly, the Xbox sales are so terrible, and there's so little way to differentiate hardware products. Like, for example, this will run on a Z2 Extreme chip, right? Most likely, maybe some different variants too, right? But for one, anybody who knows this knows that the Z2 Extreme is not even that big of a leap over Z1 Extreme. It mainly switches from a Zen 4 CPU to a Zen 5. Unfortunately, the TDP that it's being targeted here still suggests that it's like, well, for one, it's very likely an RDNA 3.5 GPU. I mean, you do get more graphics cores, but you did get that in the AI HX 370 as well. And it didn't give you that much more power per watt, right? So you really will be paying for those extra GPU cores with substantially more power, right? Yes, the TDP is kind of the same, but it's a very scalable thing. So this is what we are getting supposedly close to the end of the year. And I'm not sure if this is 4 nanometer because this is actually not specifically outlined. But that would mean we would be getting a 4 nanometer chip at the end of 2025 when Apple launched their first generation 3 nanometer chips 2 years ago, right? And we are on the second major revision of 3 nanometer from N3B to N3 to N3P. And that's not even considering that Apple's architectures across the board are more energy efficient. RDNA 4 is better than RDNA 3.5. But we might not get RDNA 4 in this kind of low power envelope ever. There are rumors that AMD is just going to transition from 3.5 straight to RDNA 5 or UDNA at that point, and RDNA 4 is going to remain exclusively a desktop and laptop, but those are the same chips as the desktop variants. Meanwhile, Apple has the advantage of N3E or N3P versus 4 nanometer. They have the advantage of ARM versus x86. They also have the advantage of actual efficiency cores being part of their design. They have the advantage of much better AI acceleration, much better ray tracing acceleration in like relation versus like their raster performance. And this to me is just like everything about like I get for ASUS because ASUS is just going to use what they can get. But like imagine getting like an Xbox handheld now that in most ways will be slower still than the Series S. At the very least, I would wait if I were Microsoft until I could fully match like Xbox Series S performance in here. And this will have, for example, a way better CPU, right? And it will have a newer GPU architecture, but it's going to have less memory, fewer GPU cores and stuff like that. So it's obviously going to have way less power to draw from than even like the 70, 80 watt Series S, which is pretty minuscule for a console already. So again, I know that this is not the creme de la creme of content that you guys care about, but as somebody who cares about the console market, even not just the console market, right, but just even looking at what Valve is doing with SteamOS, which is a dedicated platform for gaming. Yes, it does have other functions, but it's primarily used for gaming. The amount of people who use Steam Deck for like desktop tasks is like very, very minuscule. And that to me already shows, oh, you have one piece of hardware, you have like one piece of software, even if both of them are pretty open and subject to change and even subject to like third-party interpretation, it's way better than this super broad approach that Microsoft is trying with Windows. And to me, at this point, Xbox should die as a console completely. And Microsoft should not make their own hardware pretty much at all. I think that the last few generations of Surface hardware have been a pretty good example of why it, like, I don't know who still buys it, right? It looks sleek maybe somewhat, but it doesn't have like best screens for the money, best speakers, even best build quality, which used to be like a big advantage, and certainly nothing resembling best performance or best battery life. So yeah, it's, again, I know this is an Apple focused channel, and I've bothered you guys more than long enough with this, but this to me just is yet another failure in the Xbox saga. Microsoft will be a very successful game publisher. They own Bethesda, they own Jesus, why can I not think of that? What was the $70 billion acquisition that Microsoft made? Activision, Activision Blizzard King, actually. But like trying their own hardware, at this point, I would just embrace the Switch 2. I would embrace PS5. Hey, we are just 2 years away from a potential PS6, right? Embrace the PC platform. Embrace some deeper like optimization for PC finally after all these years. Focus on features that Windows sucks at, like better sleep and standby modes. And be done with an attempt to make it your own. That is my how people talk after 1 year of Apple AI, right? Like Apple failed, so they need to like catch up. To me, Microsoft has now been failing with hardware for like 15 years. It's like really like what are we talking about at this point, right? I would argue ever since they launched the original Kinect, they never had a hit hardware product ever since. The kickstand on the original Surface Pro was cool, but then you see where the Surface market ended up. Finally, the Xbox One was very misguided and like focusing on everything but gaming supposedly. Then they had years of no exclusives. Now they have no exclusive whatsoever. So trying to build hardware without even having figured out software first, it's just embarrassing. Why not put a modified Xbox on it? Because that would require you have full backwards compatibility with Xbox games, which you might not even have the performance level to emulate Xbox Series S gaming here, because Xbox Series S is, for one, does have certain advantages like bandwidth, but it also is x86. It's not x86. It's also it's also slightly older at this point, so full-on compatibility. Once you switch the architectures, that might work between RDNA 2 and 3.5, maybe even between RDNA 2 and RDNA 4. We see PS5 Pro utilizing some RDNA 4 elements, right, but still staying mostly on RDNA 2. So that would mean we might have one backwards compatible generation or two. After that, it will really start become problematic. Second, Xbox as an old platform is not very well received. I mean, something like the PSP did back in the day. You mean because PSP ran PS1 games? That we are very much away from that. Like the problem is you can do that, but you saw the problem even with PlayStation Portable and PlayStation Vita, which is because they had separate development pipelines from the PlayStation 2 and PlayStation 3 and later PlayStation 4, which changed drastically by switching to x86 from PowerPC. By that point, Sony was like, you know what? We're not going to keep developing games for it. And that is going to be a problem for Microsoft because Microsoft is working on improving Windows, but now they would have to make an Xbox console operating system offshoot, but still make sure that Steam runs on it because that is better, right, for many people than going through the Microsoft Store. You're saying it will be better than Windows? There are problems, though. When you look, for example, at SteamOS, SteamOS does have problem with certain multiplayer games, online games, right, or games that have very aggressive anti-cheat systems, because those anti-cheat systems and those like verifiers that, oh, you are a legitimate player, you're like not a bot, right, those are specifically built for Windows. So now instead of benefiting from being a Windows device, now you're going back on it. The only way it would work if you could automatically make it compatible with Xbox developed games, but you wouldn't necessarily have the power for it, and you would run into backwards compatibility issues once the architecture becomes dramatically different from the Series S and X. Now, they might actually still call it something like an Xbox OS because the design of the OS will most likely be a bit like Steam's big picture mode, right? But it still will be Windows underneath. I mean, think about it. The Xbox console itself has been very much Windows underneath. It just has benefited from being only on one or two pieces of hardware. And from being a very locked down system, so you're wasting very few resources on like security overheads and stuff like that. You have very little background tasks that could spring up any moment, eat up your memory, your CPU resources. Who would play CS2 on the Steam Deck? Well, I would argue a ton of people. Also, obviously, your Steam library is not just CS2. Guys, but my voice is starting to go away. This has been almost 2 hour stream, which I definitely did not expect to be the case today. Thank you so much for finding this stream, for making it lively for me. As always, shout out for you guys to do the YouTube jazz before we wrap up. Subscribe, like, share, comment, consider leaving a super chat, consider becoming a channel member, consider becoming a Patreon supporter, and consider becoming now a member on Discord, which has been better for me in many ways than I've expected. Yeah, beyond all that, I'll of course try to stream the coming week. I actually have a lot of work, but if something really big happens as a leak leading up to Dub, I'll try reacting to it. But then the week after, I'm pretty much guaranteed to be streaming almost daily. Obviously, live streaming Dub itself, but also after that. Oh yeah, and I'm away on the weekend, so that will take away some streaming opportunities too. But I'll guess I'll try to stream on Thursday, and then the stream after that will be probably on Monday then. Maybe I'll push in another stream while I'm visiting my mom, but yeah, I cannot guarantee that for now. Yeah, that's about it. A lot of logistics, a lot of preparation leading up to Dub, a lot of leaks reaction, some distraction for people like me who still care about like gaming hardware in this particular space. Thank you guys so much. As always, let me know what you would like to see me cover next. I'll see you guys next time. This is Mark Tech tuning out. And you know what? You're even gonna get Big Mark at the very end. Wee, woo, 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 woo. Have a nice one.